the States Assembly website. If all mobile phones could just be on silent or switched off, please. And I'd be grateful if everyone who speaks could ensure that they do state their name and role, although we will move on to introductions. I believe we're going to be joined by Deputy Gorst at some point. If we could just make sure we introduce him formally, that would be useful, please. So we'll start with introductions. I'm Deputy Lucy Stevenson and I'm the Vice Chair of the panel. I'll be chairing this hearing today in the absence of the Chair, Deputy Miles, who sends her apologies.
Deputy Jonathan Reniff.
Constable David Johnston, panel member.
Deputy Max Andrews.
Deputy Alex Curtis, panel member.
Elaine Miller, Minister for Treasury and Resources.
Jonathan Russell, Deputy Director of International Revenue Jersey.
Richard Sommerskill, Controller of Revenue. Good morning, Richard Bell, Treasurer.
Thank you very much, everybody. We've got 2 hours for this hearing and, as always, lots of areas to get through, lots of things to discuss. I'm going to start today just looking back to our previous quarterly hearing and some comments that have been made about the transfer of up to 25 million from the Consolidated Fund to the Stabilisation Fund. And the suggestion was it was still under review and that the 2024 accounts were currently still subject to audit. Can you provide an update to us, Minister, on that transfer, please?
Yes, well, clearly the 2024 accounts have been finalised and audited and published, and we know there is not sufficient capacity to make that transfer. So that transfer won't be happening. I think the plan was if there was excess income or underspends, those would be used to transfer into the stabilisation fund. But we don't have the funds to do that, is the bottom line. The stabilisation fund, it's a valuable part of our overall fiscal strategy. It has been depleted largely through the COVID years. Money was withdrawn, and that is exactly what it's there to do. You know, the stabilisation fund that's there, we would always aim in periods of strong economic growth to put money into that fund to help, you know, to stop overheating in the economy, to moderate inflation, and then in periods of downturn or periods of difficulty such as COVID, we take the money out. You can take money out to help stimulate the economy at that time. I think it's also important to remember that while we could have possibly put money in earlier, we have used the funds to repay the COVID debt. So there was also some debt incurred during the COVID period. And we have repaid that debt rather than put money into the stabilisation fund. So it means we don't have debt, but monies have not gone into the stabilisation fund as quickly as we would like. That is still absolutely my intention that we do that, and I would fully expect that our budget for 2026 will be on the basis that surplus funds will go into the stabilisation fund.
Do you have any idea of a target of what you'd like to see in the next budget go into the stabilisation?
I think it's trying to set a target, but I mean, I think we had said 25 million last time. I'd imagine we may have a very similar target, but really we're going through the budget process at the moment, and we will clarify that as part of the budget process.
The Fiscal Policy Panel have pointed out that we've had buoyant tax revenues over the last few years, and that was exactly the time when the Stabilisation Fund should have been replenished. Why do you think it's not been possible to do so?
Well, I expect other demands on public service for public services, because you know there is always a balancing act between meeting demand for services and effectively saving for a future time, and the balance would appear to have fallen on provision of public services.
I guess the point would be, though, if we can't afford to top up the stabilisation fund at a time of buoyant tax revenues, when will we?
I don't know if it's fair to say, well, buoyant. I mean, we did have a good year. I think 2023 was a strong year for the economy. I can't remember what happened in 23 where the excess funds went, murdered excess funds. But even though the economy is buoyant, the demands for spending are incessant. You know, everybody wants money. You know, we're still looking at, rising costs from public service. and it is, do you provide those services at the level the public want or that states members want, or not? So it is a difficult balancing act.
It does sound like we're supported the principle of a stabilisation fund, but in practice, it's hard to see how we're going to get to a place where it will ever be.
We will, to the extent we have surplus income, then yes, that will be, I would be hoping to put it into the stabilisation fund or other reserves.
But what is surplus income? How do you define surplus income?
Oh, surplus income is exactly that, where we bring in more income than we spend. But there are pressures arise all the time, and there are regularly pressures arising for things that have to be funded are kind of unavoidable spend.
Can I also ask, Minister, obviously we are all aware that there are insufficient funds in the stabilisation fund, so what is the alternative if there is a downturn in the economy? Where are you going to seek funds from?
Well, I don't think there's, I don't believe there's cause for concern. The stabilisation fund is part of our overall fiscal structure. As I say, we are still in I would say a strong financial position. We do have reserves. We have a very strong social security fund. The strategic reserve is strong. We, in comparison to some other jurisdictions, we have relatively low levels of borrowing. So, we are in a position whereas if we needed funds, we borrowed during COVID, during the pandemic. So, borrowing is something that you would do. You wouldn't want to borrow. You certainly wouldn't want to borrow for revenue spending, but there will be space to borrow for certain other types of spend that may be needed.
Thank you, Minister. Moving away from the stabilisation fund, earlier this week the Home Affairs Minister told the Children, Education and Home Affairs Scrutiny panel about delays to the Dewberry House Sexual Assault Referral Centre capital project, and she said it was effectively stationary at the moment because of issues with funding, and she would be working with Treasury. Can you update us on your role in that and what Treasury is doing to try to find the money for it?
I can't, because the Minister hasn't spoken to me about that. So I don't know if my officers are aware. There was a budget, I believe. A budget was allocated. I have not been updated on that particular matter.
Are you aware that anybody in your department is working on it at the moment?
Treasurer, have we been approached?
I'm just finding out.
Thank you very much.
I mean, it was originally going to be funded, I think, out of the Criminal Compensation Fund. So it's hard to understand why that money, which is a separate fund, would not be able to meet that.
Well, I've only read what's in the media, but it sounded as if there was a budget, but delays and increase of costs have meant the budget. I don't think money has been removed. It's not a case that money's been taken away. It's just that my reading from what was reported was that the budget was no longer sufficient.
The suggestion seems to be that inflation, because of delays with the planning appeal process, means that it's now outstripped its original budget. What would be the normal process in those circumstances? How does the government account for inflationary pressures? Because things must happen all the time with capital projects.
So I couldn't tell you how much is currently within it, but we carry inflation reserve on the capital side as well as on the revenue side. Obviously that's come under strain in recent times as well. But as this is a CRCF funded one, it would be first and foremost, the issue could well be relating to the funds within the CRCF. But yeah, if we were looking, so most of these inflationary elements will be, this is the advantage of doing capital every year, capable of being readjusted from one year to the next in terms of cash flow. What we might also do is look at other projects that are not moving at the pace they said they would in the budget, with a view to transferring funds from those. So there are plenty of opportunities within the budgets that are set to move funding from one to the other if one is advancing at a greater pace, or one is has seen increased costs once we verify those costs, if there are other projects that are not doing so. if that makes
You
sense.
referred to the inflationary reserve for capital, and that it's been under pressure. Has it got any money left in it?
I just can't recall the balance, but it has come under pressure, in particular relating to, most of the reserves have come under pressure relating to health spend.
But that's not capital.
No, it's not. But equally so, funds that were underspent last year in respect of capital are being used this year in respect of 2025's.
Yeah. I think the
Pressure
fact that funds have been earmarked for capital doesn't mean they're necessarily earmarked for capital forevermore. If they are not being spent, they can be brought back in and then applied to revenue.
At what stage, though, in the process are those decisions made? Because if they are earmarked for capital, and then you have got capital projects that aren't progressing because that money's been moved elsewhere, is it a moving process all of the time? Is it fluid?
So we're not at this point of taking money from capital projects that need the money at that point in time. That might be where you go to further, were we to have further strain on the total budgets. That were agreed by the Assembly. We're not there. What we do at the moment is say, if there are projects that are now forecasting to underspend against the amount of money that they had in any one year, then it can be possible to move that money around. At a level lower than that, there are what we call rolling votes, or grouped heads of expenditure for departments. So that not all projects are done on a line-by-line project approval by the Assembly. There is the ability for a department to move monies around. That gets more complicated when we're talking about a project that is funded from the Criminal Offences Compensation Fund, but still conceptually able to be done. So you'll have a schools estate budget. If one scheme is moving quicker than another, then there is the capacity for a department just to move around within their head of expenditure without needing to come to the Treasury to adjust that.
And sorry, does that, just for our benefit, does that include, as Deputy Renniff said, moving money from what would be a spend on capital to address revenue pressures now? Because you mentioned we're not at the stage of stripping projects of capital funding, but this is where funding is released from a capital project. But here we have a project where potentially the capital funding source is insufficient, but it doesn't appear there's any other capital funding available to the project.
So I would say that these are an exceptional position at the moment, but could you just clarify a situation? If a department during the year forecasts that this year they're going to be underspent, and they do a good forecast ahead of lodging the budget, then
on capital,
then that is accommodated within the budget. We, as the Treasury, we increase the following year's budget because the department's told us that this year they're not going to spend the money. If they tell us they're spending the money and then it turns out they didn't, then that's a different matter. So we're reliant upon good forecasting. That forecasting is improving across the piece, as evidenced by the fact that the underspend on capital programme outside of the NHF keeps coming down. So we have planned underspends that we accommodate within the following year's budget. That's the budget that's approved by the Assembly. If, however, during the year after the budget is lodged, there are underspends that weren't forecast, often they can be used to balance the books. The way the Public Finances Law works, it says ministers have to balance budgets from within the resources they have.
But you would expect halfway through the year, if a department has a capital project, you would expect halfway through the year them to be able to say, are they on target or not, to complete that project and spend the money that's allocated for that year. Okay. So it's a matter of, you know when you're going to spend.
It may help for us to receive in writing the extent to which capital project underspends may be directed to revenue.
And perhaps an update on the particular case.
If we could,
Yeah, we
about
might want to follow
Dewberry
that up.
House when you find out more information.
So
Staying on...
I've got a bit of an answer on that then. £1.7 million more needed on the project. Planning has only just been given on the project.
But I think the question we're trying to get at is whether that 1.7 million is available? Is there that money in the? Is there a kind of like just a sense that this is too much and we're not prepared to fund it, or is it that there's no money in the criminal compensation fund?
That's quite a large movement on a more modest project, and we'll just be going through the exercise now.
Staying within the theme of economic outlook, a number of questions in the Assembly, oral questions, have been seeking to understand the housing market. And in particular, under your remit is the housing market for the construction within Andium's property. So would it be possible to advise further about the assurances and the assurance checks your department commission for projects? In particular, what cost data is considered by those who provide you assurance?
Well, firstly, I'm not sure it's right to say that the housing market is in my remit. It's clearly not. That's with the Housing Minister. I am the shareholder representative of Andium, which is a slightly different thing. But each Andium development, when they start a development, that does come to me for approval. So they will do some element of this is what we're going to build, this is the overall plan, and we instruct a third-party expert to conduct an assurance review. The consultant will use local market data that they will have because they're a local professional in that sector. Independent data sources, I'm told Spons, Price Books and the Building Cost Information Service, and their experience on live projects as a benchmark. So they will benchmark the project costs to say, are these what we might expect? Are we paying through the nose, example? Those assurance reviews are made available to the Minister for Housing and his department, so they see them at a high level, although I think the Minister for Housing will have already presumably commented at an earlier stage on the overall development. Is it within line of housing policy? So he provides possible before the development is approved. So we have that data, but it is on a development by development basis.
But on that development by development basis, do you then hold the information provided by Andium as to ultimately the cost to build and what's then delivered as a result? So how much Andium wish to spend on a site versus how many 1-bed, 2-beds. And so you would have an understanding as to what each of those units would cost to build.
We will know what the I'm not sure if you can necessarily divide it down into unit by unit. I mean, we will know what the total development is and we will know what the projected cost of that is. I don't know if we get an accounting at the end that says, oh, we spent 50,000 more or less than we intended to. I presume they do things on fixed price contracts, but we know at the outset what that will cost. And that is done before construction really starts. We have to approve the funding package.
Okay.
The point we're trying to get at, I think, with all these questions is clearly there's been a lot of house price inflation, construction costs inflation. And at some point, construction costs could rise to the point where schemes become unviable or close to unviable. And to what extent are you aware of whether we're approaching that point, whether those costs of construction now mean that only Andium, for example, might be able to undertake some of these developments because the profitability margins are so small, and whilst the social housing provider owned by government might take that risk, private developers might not. I mean, we're trying to understand where the market has got to, and you hold data on that.
We hold data. We have data on a development by development basis about Andium. We are not running, as far as I'm aware, Treasury is not running some kind of massive spreadsheet about how much housing costs in Jersey. That does not sit with us. I mean, that doesn't sit with us. That is not Treasury's role. Our job is to look at the spend and make sure the spend is sensible and that it all stacks up at a viability perspective. And Andium decides on its own viability based on its own operating model at the moment. Now, if construction costs have gone up, I imagine everywhere they've gone up because wages have gone up. We know wages have gone up. The cost of bricks have gone up. The cost of materials have gone up. Jersey is not alone in all of that. So those are all costs. But there may very well be things that the Assembly have done that are not helping. That if you start going to developers and saying, you must build to these standards, that's an affordability issue. You must make sure this is there.
I feel as Deputy Renniff highlighted,
issues.
what we're trying to understand is, to what extent do you hold data that could help inform the Assembly or explain to where we are in this construction cycle? And you touched on the word viability. You must be assured that sites are viable for Andium to make money from those sites.
Are viable for Andium.
What we're looking to understand
is
how much of that data could we perhaps share or use to inform that wider understanding to make policy. Because if to put it back, if members are making decisions in these states that are not in the interest of the housing market, and the government may hold significant data on that, is it not worth sharing that?
I think there's issues there with commercial sensitivity. With if Andium has signed up to, in terms of how it instructs contractors, it goes out to partners. There will be developers who build themselves. Andium will go out to other contractors to develop. So that I have some doubt as to what the benefit is of releasing data just on Andium when there are other social housing providers. There are parishes building homes occasionally. There are other private developers. And I think it's difficult for us to intervene in that too much. I'm not sure how we can.
Just to expand upon that, we would have to look at the commercial sensitivity, but we undertake similar work with SOJDC as well, of course. If you're looking at viability outside of social housing, although of course there are often restrictions put on the developments that SOJDC do in terms of first-time buyers, such like. Then that we do the same work when we're looking at a scheme SOJDC deliver. There are not some of the same restrictions in that. Yes, you're right. Well, the housing market prices are.
I think we've really got to move on. If we talk, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much, Chair. Minister, what is your understanding of what the main domestic inflationary pressures are in Jersey, and what work, if any, is being undertaken to address those issues?
Well, we know that inflation it has come down. I think there is still inflation there is imported inflation. It comes in with the price of goods, like the cost of bricks, the cost of food. So as inflation rises elsewhere, that inflation is imported into Jersey. There will have also been inflation impacts due to rising wages, spending in the public sector. But again, we need to spend money. There is a limit to what we can do with imported inflation, and there's a decision to be made as to, do you want people to, is the best thing for the cost of living for people to have more money or not?
I know obviously the Fiscal Policy Panel in their May report mentioned about imported inflation, but also about domestic inflation, such as with the pay awards for public sector workers and also with the transition to a living wage. So how is the Council of Ministers and yourself as Treasury Minister going to be in a position where the Council of Ministers are going to try and curb the rate of inflation as much as we can do in the island during the period of 2026?
Well, as I say, it is clear that if wages go up, there may be an inflationary impact, but the balance of wages not going up, you have to remember that there were teacher strikes, and it's difficult to give one group of employees pay rises and not others. And we do have to reward our public sector appropriately so that we keep good staff. And that is the balance between paying people well and giving people a living wage, which is what we're working towards, with the risk of inflation.
It's often mentioned that there's imported inflation and domestic inflation. Do you do any work at all to try and understand the relative contributions of imported inflation versus domestic?
I would imagine the Economy Department, that sits with the Department of the Economy, the Economist team. I'm not sure how much work they do on that, but are you aware, Richard?
Yeah, they look at that. And at the moment they're focusing on housing market. So we know what some of those factors are. You know, as you pointed, living wage, FPP's talked about that. FPP also talk about, therefore, it's important that the package that sits alongside moving to a living wage improves in productivity, which would therefore counteract those inflationary pressures.
I mean, I think the point we're trying to get at is that we can't control imported inflation, but we can have some control over domestic inflation, and we're just trying to understand what work is being done to try and control that. I think that was the.
Well, as I say, that's a balancing act. We could control inflation by not putting up any duties. But then, what does that then mean for the environmental argument, the public health argument? But as the Treasurer says, you know, the living wage was accompanied by the Better Business Support Package, which is looking to support those industries which are most affected to help make them more productive. There is a clear productivity grant, which has been taken up. I think we've had about, again, I have notes on it. We have had enough, you know, there's about 700 businesses have signed up for that. I'll find the notes later on, sorry. But, you know, we have had, monies have been paid out under that grant. People have applied for that grant. There's the apprenticeship grant, there's the upskilling grant. So we have had mechanisms in place to help businesses become more productive at the same time as paying more wages. So we are doing that. The Cost of Living Group meets to discuss cost of living issues regularly.
Okay, yep, thank you very much, Chair. Minister, obviously it's been touched upon about the Council of Ministers seeking to invest in the public realm. And obviously if we are in a position where we see inflation, as reported in the May report, exceeding 2% until 2029, what impact is that potentially going to have? And is there a risk that we could be crowding out the private sector as well?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of your question because I was looking for that information. Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes,
sorry,
so
Deputy.
In simple terms, I'll keep it very brief. The Fiscal Policy Panel in their May report mentioned about inflation exceeding a rate of 2%. Of course, we are fully aware of the Council of Ministers seeking to invest in the public realm. So what potential impacts could that have on domestic inflation? And is there a risk as well that we could be crowding out the private sector?
I'm not sure what we mean by crowding out the private sector, because investing in the public realm is largely, that will be capital projects. And we don't have our own builders, so we will be going to the private sector construction companies, I believe, to build those projects. Yep. So they will be very much benefiting from that investment, as will the general public and the whole ongoing well-being and the well-being and the attractiveness of the island to attract more business, attract people into town.
Can I also ask as well, Minister, obviously we've got the forthcoming government budget that is due to be lodged in September. So what is this budget going to look like? And also what considerations are being made when we're looking at the rate of inflation, and also we're looking at the level of public investment and the potential impacts that could have on inflation persisting?
I think I'm not sure that public investment will necessarily lead to a rise in inflation. Public investment...
It depends on the extent.
It depends what it is. I mean, investing in capital projects may not lead to inflation if we...
Or overall public spending?
Overall public spending, well, would you like us not to spend? What would you like us not to spend on?
We are about to move on to some questions about the budget, so we'll do that.
The budget will be the budget.
And just before we do move on, just around... shocks to the economy and that may come up, to what extent, given global uncertainty, and it seems every day there's a bit more uncertainty in another way or another, how does the financial planning factor in additional unexpected economic shocks?
Well, as I said earlier, we are in a better place than many other jurisdictions, We do have strong reserves. We have relatively low levels of borrowing. We would be able to borrow if we needed to borrow for large capital projects. And I think the FPP recognise that while there is uncertainty, as an international finance centre, we may benefit from that, because there may be people will look to put their money into safe and stable jurisdictions like Jersey, which is, why preserving that reputation for stability and good regulation is important, and competitiveness that Deputy Gorse is leading on. Equally, there may be downturns here and there, so we just need to monitor that and see where we do, and we do keep track with the FPP on how things are going. And inflation, I think we have to remember, inflation is over 2%, but it is vastly down from the 10 or 11% it was 2 years ago. So it has fallen to a much more manageable level, and we will take that into account with all the usual forecasts we are taking all of those things into account in developing the budget.
Which brings me nicely on to, can I ask for an update on how the preparations for the budget are going, please?
The budget is preparing as it is proceeding as you might expect. Treasury have done some preliminary work as they usually do. We have had several meetings with Council of Ministers to look at where our funding pressures are. We are continuing with the strategy set out for the budget last year of trying to restrain growth in the public sector. So trying to restrain growth in spending, trying to restrain growth in headcount, in fact reduce headcount. That is always more difficult than it sounds. And to focus really on delivering the CSP. So we've had a number of workshops with the Council of Ministers, and we're working through all those elements at the moment.
Thank you. You say reduce headcount there. Does that mean there will be more redundancies along the way coming?
Well, we've departments, I think, had efficiency targets for this year. They will have efficiency targets for next year. We will be expecting them to deliver those savings. I think redundancies have been relatively limited. It's been done by vacancy management. We've had a recruitment freeze. We're not engaging consultants. We're cutting back on the use of consultants. We're trying very hard in health and other departments to cut back on agency and temp staff, which are expensive. So there is it's not just a matter of redundancies, but there are a number of elements and strategies that can be brought into reducing the overall pay bill, if you like.
Do you have a target for reducing?
I don't know if there's a target as such.
That's the targets were the same targets as was set out in the government plan.
Targets for this year.
The budget last year for 2026 with some detail given in respect of that. As things stand, those are the ones laid out in that. We are currently updating the tracking of savings to date this year and departmental ability to deliver, or they're progressing of their plans to deliver next year's targets. There was about 4 million unallocated from the 26 target which is being worked on. Whether there are higher savings depends on the outcome of the budget round we're going through with the Council of Ministers at the moment.
You've mentioned once or twice the overspends in health, which have had money allocated from elsewhere. We've had overspends in health for a number of years. Are you going to attempt some kind of rebasing of health spending in this year's budget to more realistically reflect true costs of health?
So we're working with health colleagues on what the long-term settlement, for want of a better word, would be in terms of balancing health service sustainability with financial sustainability. We're not alone in that world. A lot of press in the UK relating to the NHS. Some similar pressures across sister islands. So we're working with The department and the ministers are meeting. So the minister meets with the Minister for Health and Social Services, looking at what that will be. I think the long-term sustainability will be an issue to be addressed in the subsequent government plan. This plan will provide what we can see currently in terms of run rates and what it means for next year into the plan, and there's that more strategic issue relating to the ongoing funding of healthcare will come back into the next government and the subsequent plan. But there's a lot of work going on.
So
it's just not in a shape to bring forward in this budget, given the tight timescales.
So the current funding formula is inflation plus 2% for health, and every year it's overspent that. Are you going to try and rebase that inflation plus 2% figure in this budget, or are you signalling that that isn't actually a problem for the next government?
So there is a wide range of what that number might be, and there's a wide range of experience elsewhere. Fair to say there will be a stopgap rebasing likely in this budget, and then what we need to do is have a stable funding formula going forward. The current formula is from 2013, it was health-led. We're working with health colleagues on what that might be going forward. There is a lot of inflation out there in the health system, be it through tertiary care, what we refer to the UK, be it through drugs costs. That 2% was not just about inflation, it was also about new technologies and new drugs and treatments that come online. So we're looking at what we see elsewhere, and that work is fairly well advanced, but also need to think about how you fund it on an ongoing basis. So that work will come through into the next government.
Yes.
But we will
The
do a
work
degree
is
of rebalancing.
begun. The work has begun. We're not kicking the can down the road for another government.
But a stopgap solution for this
I don't think it's a
next year.
stopgap. It's a piece of long-term work. It will take time to work through, but we have started that work, and the minister is working on it.
I guess what I was asking about was the formula. Inflation plus 2%. Will there be a new
You
formula?
are asking if it's something, what is going to be in the budget, and I'm not going to tell you what's going to be in the budget.
But you could say whether there will be a new formula.
I'm not going to say if there's going to be a new formula. It is a work in progress.
Minister, I wonder if I could ask how confident you are that we will get to a point where we do have a sustainable footing for healthcare, in those having been part of the discussions and the work that's going on now. Sometimes it does feel like the 4-year political cycle, we're never going to get it done. If we do a bit of work each cycle, then change a little bit, so we pass it on to the next assembly. Are we ever going to get there?
Well, I think we have to. We have to. The work has started. We're working closely with health to look at the whole health. We're always going to struggle, as the Treasurer says. We're not alone in having struggles with funding healthcare. We've an ageing population as well. We have people who are older, living with more conditions. The Minister is very keen that we do, as doing elsewhere, that we do much more in terms of public health, preventative healthcare from an earlier stage. So I think the whole model needs looking at, and in terms of how we go down make sure we're using preventative care as much as we can. But yes, we have to be confident that we will get an answer to that because we are possibly working to a model that doesn't fit anymore, and that model needs to be addressed, and how we just fund the whole healthcare system going forward. And there may very well be hard decisions to be made. Can you pay for particular drugs if paying for one drug for one person means that 10 people over there don't get treatment? There are always going to be difficult decisions, but those aren't for me.
What is for Treasury? Is there anything that Treasury can do process-wise to try and help those processes kind of level out over political terms, so that you don't lose the work every time and don't have to start again?
Well, health, that's a matter of political intervention, really. If the new health minister comes in and says, this is all rubbish, I'm going to do something completely different. If we have a health minister who comes in and says, good work's been done, and yes, we need to carry it on. So it's really what the political will is.
Okay.
And I think we should carry on with the Treasury team and the finance team in health, are working very hard together to try and reach solutions on that.
So we have a much improved understanding of where the pressures are coming from, much improved understanding of where the inflation is coming from. That should lead us to be able to, working with health, come to a position alongside policy work that gives them an envelope that they should be able to live within. That's the focus for what we're trying to do for 2026, and that, but the cost won't become stable because of the pressures within the system that are additional every year. And we're starting also to see the pressures that relate to an ageing demographic. The formula was not intended to deal with the ageing demographic, but that's ultimately something we're starting to see push through now. But we're in the early foothills of that ageing demographic pressure. So we're trying to model through what that would be in such a way that you don't just go from year to year, and that you have a better understanding of where the trend's taking you. Rather like has been done on pension costs previously, and rather like is better understood now in terms of care costs funded through the long-term care fund.
Thank you. Growth bids. Are you accepting growth bids from departments as part of the budget process?
We haven't had a process for growth bids this year. In the past, departments have just come forward with numerous growth bids. We have not done that this year. There are some requests for funding due to
Desperate need.
not desperate needs, no. What we, where there are risk elements, things have come forward over the course of the year that do represent, should we say, unavoidable spend, addressing risks. But we haven't said to departments can't just come forward and saying, we've got a great idea, we want 10 people to provide this new service. So, we haven't had that type of growth bid. But there are funding pressures have arisen during the year, and we are looking at how those can be accommodated. And that's what we're discussing with council ministers.
Thank you. We know that a vape tax
Yes.
is likely to be part of the budget coming up. Are there any other new revenue-raising measures that are likely to be included as part of the budget?
We're not starting on the basis that there are no plans for significant increases. No new revenue-raising measures. There'll be the usual uprating we'll be considering the usual uprating of tax allowances, increases to AMPOs and duties. We're looking at those. And the vape tax is the only new one that will come in second. We're anticipating that coming in the second quarter of 2026. And that will not generate a huge amount of income, but it's not really about income. That is more about sort of public health and deterrence of children. From my perspective.
Just on that though, will you be sticking to the commitment to reintroduce the fuel duty inflationary component that was suspended last year?
Fuel duty, that is one thing that we are discussing. But as we say, the balancing act.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to a few questions about the government headquarters acquisition, which I believe at this point has now gone through. And of course, the government is now leasing the building from the Social Security Reserve Fund. So in light of its kind of completion, what steps were taken to assess the lease agreement as then finally agreed as being the best investment for the Social Security Reserve Fund?
Well, I think firstly it's not entirely complete. We've gone through part of the process. We exercised the option to purchase from the developer. The public have, in the interim, the public own the building. They have paid and are the relevant sums of money to acquire the building. So the public owns the building, and we're just working through the actual structure for how the fund will hold. So there will be some form of special purpose vehicle to be established, and the law officers are working on that at the moment. So the public owns the building.
Where has the public funded the building purchase cost from?
It was funded by the public are holding on behalf of the fund. Effectively, the fund will have paid. It's an investment of the fund. I think before that assessment all happened last year before we went to the Assembly. So the Assembly approved the fund's purchase, and it was agreed. The Treasury Advisory Panel approved it. It was a satisfactory investment grade. It was a satisfactory investment grade property. It had the right level of yield. In fact, I think I've got a note of yield somewhere. Yes, we're expecting long-term low-risk investment, 5.4% IRR. What's it?
It's a rate of return.
Rate of return, which was approved by the advisory panel. The rental terms mirror what would have been paid to Dandara,
It's interesting you say the public own it. It's the Social Security Reserve Fund who own it, and that is not the same as the public.
It's as a matter of legal ownership, the fund can own the property. I believe the fund is not a legal entity that can own property. The public can, so the public own the property at the moment. This is all just this is within the realms of legal technicalities, which I find slightly frustrating.
The reason it matters, though, sorry, Minister, I interrupted.
But we are working on the structure, and in early course, the public will transfer the land to a vehicle which is owned by the fund. So this is an interest that said it would pay,
So-
which is the rent.
So-
On that rate, if we
There is-
Draw a parallel here.
Yeah.
Philip Lefevre House was notionally held by the Social Security Fund, but the legal technicalities of it, my understanding was held by the public of the island, like any property that's owned by government and states departments. What the work that the minister's talking about is in this case putting it on that more protected footing through transfer, because the contract with Dandara was with the public of the island essentially in terms of the contract we had in place. We didn't at that point have a decision that the Social Security Reserve Fund made. So we've executed the option. We're now working through moving the property into a special purpose vehicle that protects it for...
That's fine.
the
Okay,
fund.
yeah, no, I get that. That's fine.
The
Fine. No,
The
that's
fund is not being prejudiced.
no.
We are working
No,
towards
it's a process. So there is a plan, and will obviously be updated when the special purpose vehicle has been formed and the property is transacted through.
Yes.
Quickly, you mentioned the return that you calculate as 5.4%. Could you explain how the fund kind of calculates that? In part because I know Deputy O's have calculated that the initial rate of return was based on, his calculation, £3.8 million on a £91 million purchase equates to about a 4% return in the first year of ownership. So under what model are you using to calculate your investment return?
A technique called the internal rate of return. It is the rate of return. So obviously, just to illustrate, there is a residual value to the property at the end of the lease between the government and the Social Security Reserve Fund. That's taken into consideration. There is the cost up front. There is then rent that rises with inflation every year with a floor of 2% and a ceiling of 5%. The internal rate of return is that discount rate that when you apply to those cash flows gives you a net return of zero. So it's a means of calculating the return, because obviously that would change each year as the inflation on the rent comes through and you take into account the residual value.
Okay, and of course 5.4% return on commercial property, notwithstanding the tenant being a government with a high safety. Now, it is not a high yield in commercial property in Jersey. D2RE's latest publication highlights a number of rents on commercial property recently purchased between 7.75%, 8.33%. So to what extent is the fund also happy to invest in assets that are deemed very safe but give a lower yield, like the government building versus high risk? And is it a...
So we have a blended portfolio.
You do, but
drives the return.
Yes.
Not all of the investments within the fund return the same investment. So they invest in pools within the Common Investment Fund. There are different risk-reward profiles from those different funds, and we get a weighted...
Yes. So is there any plan to change that blend to invest more in government-style, lower yield, lower risk, or is it felt that actually the fund has to, without prejudice, ensure balance and not preference low risk in its blend.
There are assets already that we invest in that are lower risk, lower return. You're focusing in solely upon the property class of assets. We're looking at this asset in its own right, not necessarily by investing in comparing it to property funds in the UK or other assets locally. I will say that the risk in terms of those other assets would of course be higher, given that they're not occupied by a government, and that is generally the case, and therefore they would be expected to have higher returns. I think what is less relevant, but it is still relevant to the Social Security Reserve Fund, is the liquidity aspect. So if we invested the whole 2.6 billion on illiquid assets in Jersey, then that would make it very difficult to use the fund for the purpose that it was created. So that comes into the balance as well.
Okay.
We move on to Pillar 2. The news last week carried news that the US administration had reached a deal with various other governments to effectively, as it was reported, exempt US companies from Pillar 2. What effect do you see that having on Jersey's Pillar 2 regime?
I suppose the first thing I'd say is, would you like me to answer the question now or in the States on Tuesday with your oral question? I'm happy to do both. Yes, I'm happy to do both. So the first thing is, I wouldn't use the word deal because nowhere in the communication, be it US Treasury or the G7 member states, use the word deal. They use the word understanding. And the reason I think that words are important is because an understanding is one thing, a deal is a very different thing. So if we set the context of the US's Big Beautiful Bill, which had something called a clause at number 899, which is quite technical, which would have allowed the US or president to, in effect, add additional tariffs and charges to foreign companies that were invested in the UK if they were based in a country that had implemented Pillar 2 tax regimes. Both those foreign countries, other G7 members, and the US domestic companies lobbied the White House very strongly because they felt it was counterintuitive to the president's aim to get more foreign investment into the US and repatriate funds rather than the reverse. So I think we have to see that understanding in those terms, that the G7 were prepared to give an undertaking of an understanding in order to remove that 899 from the Big Beautiful Bill, which we've all seen play out during the course of this week, and the US has now got it through, and it was either signed last night or it's going to be signed into law today. So I think that's an important context. Notwithstanding that, the understanding does say that G7 member states will seek to remove, in effect, undertax profit rules and income inclusion rules, and allow the US's model of global tax to sit alongside Pillar 2. Now, the reason I outline it in that detail is because you, Deputy, as chair of the group that looked into that, understand that there's a dichotomy there, because let's take the US position is a global blending solution between high and low tax jurisdictions. Pillar 2 is a jurisdictional blending solution. And so as we sit here, the only honest answer is that no one actually quite knows what effect the understanding will have in due course. So there's a working party of the relevant OECD bodies this week, and then next week is the steering group. Our deputy director is on that steering group, so she will be in Paris having those detailed discussions. Again, as we sit here, we don't know what will be, but there's quite a lot of difficulty in resolving those two positions. I think everybody agrees it's a good thing that 899 has been taken off the out of the US statute, but then there'll be a price to be paid for that. Quite what that means at this stage, we don't know. We will remain engaged. We will remain to our core principles of tax neutrality as we continue to do this, because one partial solution might be that the OECD looks at Jersey's model and say that helps resolve some of these issues, so everybody could do that particular model. The important thing for us, as we've learned since January when was it, 21st, when the president was inaugurated, is not to panic, but to keep working through the detail and keep having those conversations, and so that's where we stand.
So the budget included estimates for revenue from Pillar 2 of 52 million next year, 52 million the year after, and 54 million the year after that. In your judgment, how secure are those estimates today?
Well, they're not as secure as they were last time I came before you and you asked me these questions, and I think I suggested then that there was uncertainty. So I suppose generally the biggest impact of what's happening in the US and global uncertainty for Jersey is our economic outlook and the effect that it's having on big financial institutions, and them thinking about how their profitability through the medium term. So that number was a base case number. It didn't have any upside, but it wouldn't be, I don't think anybody on the panel will be surprised if that forecast, in light of what the FPP said in their economic assumptions, isn't quite as fulsome as it was in last year's budget, when the budget is presented later this year. The other question is, how quickly can those differences in the two systems and the approach that the OECD will need to deliver, how quickly can they be resolved? We know that the US has said publicly they would like them all resolved this year, so that it affects US companies' tax liabilities in 2025. But we are sat with the EU and places like ourselves who've got laws on the statute book, which is right now creating a liability for those in-scope companies. So you can see there's technical difficulty, and then there's political difficulty as well, right across the board.
Sticking with the revenue forecasts, they were at the time portrayed as very conservative base cases. What you're saying now is that they weren't conservative enough.
Did anybody... I wouldn't say that they weren't conservative enough. I would simply reiterate that it wouldn't be surprising in light of global events if they're not as fulsome. Now, having gone through what is a really painful, technical, political process at the OECD, where the Americans were in agreement and signed up to Pillar 2, even though they had some concerns, we raised all of those concerns that we could foresee, and yet the OECD went along. 140 countries. Could we foresee that however many months or years later from the initial agreement, that the G7 would, for the reason that the president made a decision in his big beautiful bill, could we foresee it? And I think, I don't think any of us could say that we could have foreseen that action. We, of course, have seen things since we've had a new president, and I've been open and clear that we should be more cautious, and it was more difficult throughout that period. And some people have challenged me saying, well, you're stating the obvious. But I think it's important that we've had that journey. So if this is where it gets even more nuanced, because if those issues can't be resolved and we carry on exactly where we are today, there's still that potential for the upside that we've never put into our Conservative base case.
Okay. You did raise, though, the possibility that our legislation is going to be potentially in conflict with what the United States would like. How are we going to unpick that? At what point might we have to decide we have to change our legislation? Is there a material risk of that being necessary?
Well, I mean, the only thing I can say is I don't. As we sit here, it's not possible to answer that question because of all of those considerations, those conversations, those negotiations that will take place at the OECD, at the EU. So you've also got this problem at the EU where some member states that are part of the G7 have given an understanding, but they've got a Brussels-imposed directive that says they've got to inscribe and have inscribed in domestic legislation all of the requirements of Pillar 2. So whilst it remains, whilst there's a high degree of uncertainty, there's also some pretty high barriers to get over before legislation is changed in the countries that signed up to Pillar 2 in the first instance.
Given that, then, where are you with the more practical, short-term things, commitments that you said you were going to, by August, have in place the domestic?
Did we say August? I thought we said after August. And the reason I picked that up
We'll be making a full decision on the new system in about August this year.
Okay, so that did give me the flexibility that we now need. We've basically continued to be cautious. So we've issued information to industry. Jonathan and his team have continued to have both one-to-ones and more workshop-type approaches. Internally, I think we've recruited only 2 people. If that's right.
Not the 9 or so.
Not the many that we thought we would, and they are first-class people. As we said last time, we were trying to pick people who were able to do this work or help us with other important policy and implementation work as well. And we've taken the same approach with the technology solution. We very much are trying to make the decision as late as we possibly can so we don't have any wasted spend, and making a decision to use technology that can actually help with the overall improvements to the technological interface between islanders and Revenue Jersey as well, rather than just thinking simply about Pillar 2.
There was also a registration process that was going to be opened in May. Has that opened?
So registration is on track to open at the end of this month. So what we
Doesn't sound on track for May.
no, not on track for May, but it will be started by the end of this month. The reason that we've done that is we had engagement with industry and working groups and the tax agents about the registration process and form. So I think we've had about 8 or 9 different conversations with different groups, or one-on-one conversations about the registration process. So we've taken that feedback on board and modified the process and been upfront about the information that's required, so that we can launch a product that has taken on board that initial feedback. So we've not had anyone come to us saying, why can we not register now. So we've not had anyone say, why
Didn't hit the deadline.
Exactly. And I think the reason for that is because engagement's been high in that space. So we've got a really good product just going through some security testing just now, and it'll be released in July. And we've also issued our first bulletin as well. And in that bulletin, what we'd covered off was narrative about entities that are in scope, and then narrative about registration. So we've told industry about the information that they require to get ready for registration, so that when it goes live, it's good to go. And then we also talk about key dates and deadlines in that bulletin as well. So I think,
Yeah, we could send it to the panel, can't we?
yeah, happy to send a copy of the
It's
bulletin
gonna-
so you can see.
But the summary here is that there's extreme uncertainty, that you're leaving things as late as possible as you reasonably can in order to make sure that you can be as up to date and timely as you can.
That's right. And as things stand at just now, the legislation says there's a registration requirement, which the first registration deadline we will see is 31st December this year. So, going live in July gives those groups time to get the additional information that they need.
So I wouldn't use the word extreme, but that's just a difference of vocabulary, of course.
Perhaps we can pursue that in the Assembly next week.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to move on to procurement plans. Minister, there wasn't a timeline set out for delivery of a procurement plan in the 2025 business plan. So perhaps you could provide us with one.
If you bear with me for a moment, I'll find my notes on procurement. You're jumping around the order.
Just to keep you on your toes.
Exactly.
We only provide a list, not an order.
Sorry?
We only provide a list, not an order.
All right, okay. All right, there we go. Procurement plans. Well, the strategy, we've continued to work on that, and it will be finalised over the summer. It is moving. It's moving along, and the high-level plan will be rolled out, I think, in Q4. That will very much look at improving customer focus, internal, external. Looking at roles and responsibilities. We're trying to improve the delivery of advice and guidance, both on the internet and person, enhancing accountability between Treasury and departments, because Treasury doesn't do all the procurement team, commercial services can't possibly do everything, but they are setting procedure and guidelines that departments are then meant to follow. So it's how we make sure the departments are following those. And clearly a focus on better management of public money and contribution to local economy. So those are the high-level themes for the end of the year.
As Minister, what are your priorities within that? Where do you see the most pressing areas for not maybe reform, but, just priorities?
I think priorities are that we get fair procurement that's not... that we're procuring things in a fair manner that isn't so burdensome, it's just clogging the wheels up. I think in Jersey, if somebody is spending up to £100,000, which is quite a high limit, they need to get 3 quotes. Now, for £100,000 and 3 quotes, I'd be surprised if people are going off island for those. It's only the much bigger spend where I would be surprised if people are going off island unless there was a specialist need for a specific service. I think it matters that we are facilitating local businesses tendering, and that we are getting fair pricing, and that we are managing contracts appropriately. That if someone says, I will provide this service for £30,000, you don't find yourself looking at a bill for 45 6 months later. So people managing the delivery and managing the the cost and being prepared to challenge increases is something that I personally think people really need to focus on.
Your example of the £100,000 limit and 3 quotes,
Yeah.
was your thinking there that that's an example of good practice we should continue, or perhaps where we're being disproportionate? I didn't quite understand your thrust.
No,
Do you feel we need to revisit
I think that is
proportionality?
good practice. I think it's good practice. I think if you're spending, I was surprised it was up to 100,000, but I think if you're spending that sort of money, it's not unreasonable to get 3 quotes. And if you can get 3 good quotes locally from people who appear able to provide the service they're bidding for, then if we can do that locally, that makes sense, and having people coming in from off island. But if you are looking at something that's costing much more than that, or is more specialist, then that may need to go off island.
So touching on local businesses, what engagement with local businesses has taken place as part of building the refresh of the procurement plan?
I think they have, I believe there has been quite extensive procurement engagement with suppliers, and they've certainly been doing lots of work. So digital, various departments have been having meetings with certain sectors to kind of talk about pipeline, to give them guidance about what's coming up. So Digital Jersey, we've met with Digital Jersey. Workshops for local suppliers will be taking place in the 4th quarter in terms of how to win business. Digital Service and Procurement, they've been making sure that opportunities are better communicated. They're holding workshops. They had a workshop recently with about 40 people. Health are working with people in Guernsey. I&E have regular meetings with industry to communicate possible opportunities, working with the Construction Council. So they are trying to do as much as possible to let people know and to help people understand the system.
Brilliant. Lastly, on that, I know some businesses find some of the procedures and practices and even tooling that they need to use to engage with government and procure as barriers or challenging. Given that the refresh to the procurement plan isn't quite finished, is there still time for those people who find frustrations within the process to talk to commercial services? And if so, is there a best point of contact for those who want to engage in this process?
No, we provide one. We had the PAC report. Yeah. We saw this from our interaction in private with the committee and through the report that I was going to say you have to balance value for money with that. What we need to understand is the barriers within that process, and there is a balance between needing to satisfy ourselves as to the standard of the work that we're procuring, but we will look at what it is within those businesses find difficult at the lower value end of the process. So we'll take the report, try and understand what those particular barriers are and address them.
But for those who want to go directly to talk with yourselves, executive government, is there still time to feed into the refresh?
Yes.
And you welcome those comments from businesses?
Yes.
Brilliant.
As always.
Just mentioning the PAC report there, I presume that will feed into the plan, anything you're going to take from that report. Is that correct? Is it something you'll now review, and if there's parts of it you want to...
Yeah, that's normal. We will review the report and respond as...
Yeah, I think one of the recommendations talks about increasing weighting for local companies who are employing local people and paying local tax. It's quite specific in how it phrases it. Is that something you're minded to accept?
So there was a differential in some different recruitments between 5 and 10% of that weighting. It's now mandated at 10% rather than the variability. As the Minister said, at different tender levels, we've got ourselves knotted up in some of the interaction with Public Accounts Committee about whether it was possible or not to limit it locally. If you are only having to go for 3 tenders up to a threshold, that flexibility is available to the departments and the people leading the procurement, and often that will be only local companies. There is a shift when you start to get into the higher value, or whether that relates to the need for specialisms that may not be on islands. I'd expect that to be taken into account, but that applies probably more so at the high value procurements that go out to the general market. But we can look to see how we address above that. I personally am very interested in the local employment, local apprenticeships that go hand in hand with those, as opposed to necessarily what I might describe as the more peripheral social value aspects, those ones that really add to the future sustainability of the local economy.
So what you're saying
Short
is it's
answer, we
slightly
look at the
more
recommendation.
complicated
Yeah.
than just yes or no. It's,
So, yes, in principle,
Yeah.
it will apply differently to different procurements.
okay. Thank you.
Okay, yes, I have a couple of questions regarding the transition to a living wage. Can you please update us on the role of the Treasury and Exchequer in providing assurance of the administration and use of funds provided through that transition to a living wage package?
Well, the responsibility, the Better Business Support Programme, it sits with the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development. So he has the high-level responsibility, if you like, and the Chief Officer is responsible for those factors like, you know, the adequacy of the system, making sure money spent wisely. That sits with the accountable officer. So with all expenditure of government, we are relying on ministers and their teams, their own accountable officers, to ensure value for money and governance, and ministers providing policy direction. I have my figures on this. We have, with the support package, had 6 schemes. So we've got the productivity grant, skills grant, destination marketing, route development, and then rural and marine grant and employee support. The productivity grant and skills grant are being delivered by Jersey Business. 200 companies have registered for that, and 70 applications have been received, with over $500,000 of grant funding approved at the moment. Now, those grants require matched funding, so that means the businesses themselves will have been investing £500,000. So that's £1 million of investment going into productivity and skills through those grants. So, you know, it's being marketed. Jersey Business are managing the process, and I think that's going. You know, it is. They are grants that are being taken up. Visit Jersey is managing destination marketing. Route marketing is done via Ports of Jersey, and we've just seen the Jersey to Paris flight launched, and Jet2 also coming in. So yes, but it's the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development. Those sit with all of those grants and economic development sit with him, and the proposal being that they are there to support businesses who are now paying the increased minimum wage in the move towards the full living wage.
Just so I can understand, you mentioned, I appreciate the Minister of the Economic Development, Sustainable Economic Development, is involved, but you mentioned 6 teams. Are they your teams in Treasury or his?
No, those are the schemes. They're various schemes. There are 6.
They sit under your...
No, they all sit under Minister for Sustainable
Okay,
Economic
right,
Development.
okay, I
So
take that point then.
he and his team and his accountable officer are responsible for the policy setting and then the operation of those funding schemes.
Okay, I appreciate you may well say the question is better directed to that Minister, but from your own perspective, are you able to provide an update about how the increase in minimum wage has been received by the business community? Or is that again?
Well, I'm not hearing a huge amount of noise from them. I think the living wage has gone up. They are paying those wages. I think everybody seems to have accepted that is that is the way that is the way things are, and where they can qualify for those grants, they're free to apply for those grants to help them increase productivity. Because I think the minister was always very clear that we were not just going to give money to businesses,
Was I glad you
that we would help them with initiatives to improve productivity, to upskill their employees, so that would improve, so they can add value and improve profitability by doing those things.
Yes, you touched on my final question in this area, which again you might say is more to another department, but when do you, from your perspective, anticipate that the transitional living wage package of support will translate into productivity increases and impact on economic growth? That is within your general area of expertise.
Not within my area of expertise.
No?
No. Well, those packages are aimed at improving productivity, helping businesses to become more efficient, more productive, to counterbalance the cost of our higher wages.
But the question, I'm trying to get a feel as to when you might anticipate that that transition might transfer or result in productivity.
It won't happen overnight, I don't imagine.
Well, we know
but if
that,
they're
yeah.
getting grants to help introduce new technology, well, it may happen very quickly depending on what your business is, what the productivity enhancements are. If you have an employee who's having a course for a year to upskill, then it will take a longer time for that employee to add more value. So I think it's very much dependent on the initiative the business adopts and how quickly they adapt to and use better productivity measures. I don't know if the economists may have looked into it, they may have a view, but I haven't been briefed on that.
I think it's trying to understand if if there is a plan to audit the impact of the living wage on the one hand and the support measures on the other, to see whether, are those support measures delivering the kind of growth and productivity increases that were anticipated. I appreciate that these are not straight lines, but is there an audit proposed?
It's difficult to see how you audit it, but you would think increased the business tendency survey, more positivity there, better profits, more taxes. I'm not sure how you necessarily, without going into... I don't know, it may be that economic development have set rules which says you must report to us at intervals of what you've done and whether it's enhanced your profitability. That does seem quite burdensome and bureaucratic. But it is there to help businesses improve productivity, which you would assume will ultimately flow through into higher taxes. Or more, no, higher, more
revenue.
taxes being paid, higher revenue, sorry, not higher taxes. Higher revenue, yes, you're right.
Okay, we'll go on as
And
far as that.
possibility, yes, yeah.
Okay, we'll move on to a not unrelated topic in a way. Could you please update the panel on your oversight of the priority to keep government fees and duties and charges as low as possible to help islanders with the cost of living?
Again, my oversight goes to what's directly in my control. And as we said earlier, we have said that is a priority, that we will try and minimise growth, but that takes us back to what we've already touched on. Are you going to increase fuel duty? Are you going to control inflation? So yes, we did freeze certain duties last year. We have continued to increase tax allowances. There is a procedure which says anything... So yes, that is always at the back of our mind. We are trying not to increase duties and government charges. We are trying to help with the cost of living. That has to be balanced against public health arguments on alcohol, environmental arguments on fuel duties. But any other charges that are being increased have to be, if they're being increased by more than 2.5%, generally have to be approved by the relevant minister, and they also have to be approved by me.
Yes, it does. I was trying to get at your department's oversight role than individual ministers. They always come back to you as well, do they?
They come, but I don't think there's been a case where, if it's reasonably well argued and they've said the department or there is an ask for a fee to be increased and the minister supports it, then I find it difficult to, you know, when you've got a vet work to say, no, you can't, particularly because they are principally in school fees. Most of the increases are in school fees. There have been some in Highlands, in health, private patients, and then in parking. You know, we've had some parking charges that were increased because we need that to maintain the car parks.
Sounds like a fairly steady stream of people coming to ask you for those exemptions. Over
Not really.
2.5%.
There's only really 3 departments. It's not a steady stream and it's not frequent. It's like once a year. So there are checks and balances there to try to not have. I mean, there have been a couple of areas where fees have been increased that have been very low for a long time. And, you know, I have seen that in certain departments. They charge fees that are really should be updated annually and they're just not. So then it's like, oh, well, we haven't updated for 5 years. Can we update by 10%?
And that's a long-standing government policy, isn't it? The 2.5%. That's not anything new.
I don't. It's not new,
No.
but it is part of that overall.
Yeah.
Could I ask about your remit in that and how you're applying your aim, you know, the CSP aim of keeping fees, charges and low beyond the government to the estates-owned entities? So, for example, Ports of Jersey have a price limit set by the JCRA of RPI plus 1.8% every single year till 2029. To what extent, as shareholder representative, are you having conversations to say, notwithstanding your maximum limit, we have a collective ambition to keep fees and charges as low as possible?
Well, they're aware of that, but it's again we under the no surprises policy. If there was an increase, they come and discuss that. And normally, they are coming and they are putting forward a very well reasoned argument as to why fees may have to go up. They're not all regulated. There are companies, you know, Jersey Electricity and Jersey Water are not wholly owned, and we cannot influence those if we risk prejudicing the interests of the minority shareholders.
But for example, Ports of Jersey is wholly owned. So to what extent do they come to you and do you push back or not to say these are, you know, anything going above RPI is inflationary in that sense?
I think we normally hear about price increases that are significant, but as I say, if you have a subject matter expert, if you like, saying operationally we need to increase these fees or we will not be profitable, for example, or because we have these other costs that have to be met, it's difficult to push back. There are areas I do push back, but on their fees, we talk about them, we challenge as much as, I will challenge as much as I think is appropriate.
So in a way, Deputy Commissioner, that's what was my final question. Have there been instances where you have actually succeeded in pushing them back or not acceded to their request?
Not that I remember, but generally I think where a department is saying we have reason for this increase and the Minister supports it, there hasn't been a case where I've thought, I mean, if I thought something was open to challenge, then I would. I mean, I did have a conversation with the Minister for Education, Lifelong Learning recently about some small fee increases that he wanted to make, and I found it very confusing. So we've talked about that, and it's all fine. But I think where something feels reasonable, if something felt unreasonable or unnecessary, or it wasn't a well-argued case, I would push back. But when you are presented with a sensible, reasonable, well-argued case, and the Minister supports it,
Okay, thank you for that.
I haven't had a case where...
The way I present it currently, you've pointed it to be a long-term policy. I think departments have learned that if they're going to come to look for the endorsement or the agreement to go above 2.5%, they come with a well-thought-through rationale.
I understand what you say.
And that's over a long period of experience of interaction where perhaps in the past it may have been less well thought through and the rationale not identified. Just through that longer term interaction, departments now come forward with better thought through and well researched rationale as to why those costs go.
I suppose it does just beg the question, just to push it a little bit further, about if it's effectively business as usual and people are complying, we aren't really pushing back on anything. Why is it a CSP priority as if something new or different is being done, and we're saying as part of helping islanders with the cost of living and being anti-inflationary, etc., we are keeping charges low. Aren't we just doing the same?
No, we're
That's what
not.
we've
We're
always
not.
done.
We have. There is a guideline. We have put a greater focus on it. So we have frozen because of the cost of living to try and keep. As I come back to last year, we froze alcohol and fuel duties to impact cost of living. That would have kept inflation down. If we put up those duties, inflation very much higher for quite a number of years. So there will be demands, and that's why some departments have had to come and say, with the cost of inflation in various aspects, the cost of car park maintenance, the cost of construction, whatever, we need more than 2.5%, which also may also feed into the policy of trying to stop people driving. So we are still trying to do that, but they're always to say you can't have more than 2.5% means that if it then means the departments have got to cut back on services, then that's counterproductive. So there just has to be, it's this constant balancing act between what services can you provide and, what is the impact on the public.
Okay, thank you very much. The Utter Health and Social Services Scrutiny Panel hearing on the 12th of June, it was raised, I think, with the Minister of Social Security that the cost of living group, which I think you referenced earlier, had not met since the 26th of March this year. Has the group met since then? And if so, what considerations have come to light since then?
Yes, it met 2 weeks ago. I think you will know, it's often very difficult to get 3 ministers in a room at the same time because people have 4 ministers actually in the room at the same time. And there's not always things that are necessarily updated enough to talk about. Things do not necessarily change at 6-weekly intervals. But we met last week and we were talking about, we looked at the Better Business Support Package. We met privately to discuss a particular piece of work that the Minister for Social Security is working on, and then members from the Economic and International Affairs panel were invited. So Deputy Taddy attended the meeting to listen to the discussion, and we talked about the Better Business Support Package because that's directly of relevance to them, and we are just looking at that was the main item. There were the main 2 items on that agenda. So we do meet fairly regularly. I think it is keeping an overview across government of cost of living pressures. In fact, 1, 2, 3, 4. Sorry, I'm wrong. 5 ministers.
Is the aim of that meeting to drive a aggressive agenda to tackle cost of living, or is it simply to review what's already ongoing?
I'm not sure it's driving an aggressive agenda. It's looking at cost of living pressures and what can be done about them, where they're arising and what we can do to address them. Now, how do you address cost of living? We try to not create inflation by trying to keep fees and duties and costs down, by increasing the living wage. And you have to look at what the impacts of all of these, because the answer just to give everybody more income support? Probably not. So there are lots of things that can be done, but there's in the same way that there are things that can be done, there are limited things in some ways that can be done.
Can you give one example of something that has come out of that cost of living group? Something that was generated within that cost of living group?
There is work going on, but I am not sure if it's in the public domain, and it's with the Minister for Social Security, so I'm not going to discuss that.
I was after stuff that comes out of the group as opposed to work that ministers are doing, that they report into the cost of living
It's a
group.
general oversight of what is the cost of living, and just a general monitoring what's happening. I mean, we have to remember, as I say, inflation has gone down from, what was it, its peak, 12%?
Yeah.
To 2%. Now, that doesn't mean prices have necessarily dropped. Wages have gone up in that time. We are doing what we can. So it's an oversight group.
So it's not a proactive group that kind of meets to thrash around ideas and then
Well,
say,
we
right,
will
how are we
do.
going to achieve X, Y, and Z?
Well, we will do if ministers had ideas, but as I say, there is some work going on, but I don't know if it's in the public domain. So I am not going to steal the Minister for Social Security's thunder while that work is ongoing, and depending on how it goes and what it looks like in the end, and what the impact might be. So.
If we move on to the hospital funding, there is a ministerial oversight group on the 11th of April. You told us that the meetings of the groups had faded a bit. Are those ministerial oversight group meetings regarding the hospital continuing, and when did you last meet?
If I said fading, that was probably the wrong word. I mean, I think we'd had a couple that had been cancelled just because of other pressures. I think there was meant to be one this week, which was cancelled because the minister and the team were in the UK doing engagements in relation to the hospital. But yes, they are happening. I don't have the date of the last one, but we did have one relatively recently. And in the interim, I meet the finance business partner. I asked to meet the finance business partner monthly. I've been doing that since the end of January. That usually involves, I can't remember the title of Miss Hardwick and Miss Bratch, but they are usually there as well. So I am given, from a Treasury perspective, an overview of progress and what's happening, and particularly the financial reporting. It's reported in very, very great detail. It's certainly monitored in very, very great detail. So I have a monthly update from the finance team, from the new healthcare facilities project from the Treasury perspective.
Presumably the ministerial oversight group has a particular purpose. I mean, what can you give us a sense of what it is you are talking about in the ministerial oversight group?
Well, we will be talking about developments in terms of how the procurement process, what has happened so far. I mean, clearly the planning application was a success, so we've been talking about the planning application, how the procurement's going. That is a reasonably complex process. And budgetary matters. You know, it is what it is. We have a plan and we are working towards. The ministerial oversight group aren't going to say, well, actually, can we have a different colour on the outside wall?
But you might challenge the minister about some costs that had appeared that were not what you expected, or something like that.
Well, they are significantly underspent at the moment. Significantly underspent. So
for this year.
For this year, yes.
Yeah, that reflects a project that's slightly behind schedule.
Well, because procurement is taking longer.
Yeah.
But they now have planning. Work has gone on. Overdale has been largely cleared, as I recollect. We have got planning. Work is still going on. Procurement's still going on. I think a decision we're hoping for. Final decision, I think probably Q3, but stage 2 is moving. We're still in a competitive process.
The delays
the tenderers have asked for more time. It's not delays sitting with government, but the procurement is going ahead. But it is a complex piece of work, and it is important that we get the right partner.
The longer it's delayed, obviously inflation pushes up costs. Are you concerned that
I'm not sure it's necessarily delayed. I think it is moving. It is moving along to time. I'm not sure.
You just said it was delayed.
I don't think I said it was delayed. I think it is taking. They've done planning. It has made progress. We've demolished Overdale. They have got planning. We are working through procurement, which is taking, I think, a little longer than we hoped. And then once we have that partner, we will then be able to move on further. But during all of that, the spend is. I don't actually have the. So I've got the 2024 figures, but I think they are under budget for this year.
So would you summarise your position with regard to the new hospital facilities as saying you don't have any concerns at the moment?
I don't have concerns at the moment. I don't have concerns with the financial management. And it has planning, the site's been cleared, I believe, and we are working as fast as they can in a complex scenario with tenderers to get to appoint a delivery partner.
The future funding depended to an extent on Pillar 2 revenues. Is that something you're going to have to revisit, given the conversation we had earlier?
The funding, we've always said that the funding, we will use the revolving credit facility for the time being until the time is right to go to market. We will fund it when the time is right, and the Treasurer will probably say more about that.
In terms of the plan for the financing on the long term, we'll use the shorter term revolving credit facility that we already have in place and choose our time to go to market for the longer term debt in terms of the financing. In terms of my understanding, in terms of the profile of the spend to date, obviously the profile that's set or was estimated is just that, an estimate. When I have conversations, I am told that there will be a degree of catch-up as they understand better how the development will proceed. The next critical point is the outcome of the tender process in terms of determining what the build is likely to actually cost as opposed to the estimating work that has been done today.
Thank you.
Moving on.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I just want to move on to the publication in May of this year regarding Revenue Jersey, providing some data regarding the number of tax returns. It was stated that there are about 33,000 islanders who provided their tax returns. And obviously, there are 67,000 taxpayers. So I just want to know whether you have an up-to-date figure on the number of those who have actually provided their tax returns since then.
The number I have, I'm not sure what date, 49,141, of which 46,777 are for the 2024 assessment, to just shy of 2,400 from previous years of assessment.
Yeah. So obviously there's still quite a few.
But we still have
people.
3 weeks to go.
Yeah. But
He's not got the tax.
Can I just ask, Minister? So when you're liaising with your officers, I mean, what efforts are going into this to try and get people to obviously make their submissions sooner, because that is obviously quite a large number of people who remain outstanding.
Well, the deadline is the 30th of September.
Yeah.
For online returns.
September.
July.
Oh, sorry, July. Yes, the
We all thought we had
on online returns and 31st of May for paper returns.
Yeah.
So this is about the same as every year, and as you will be aware, I constantly encourage people to file their returns as early in the year as they can.
Yeah.
It's in their best interest in terms of ITIS effective rates and so on, and it's in our best interest in terms of keeping the system moving. We understand that the biggest obstacle to moving people onto online filing is the ID verification.
Yeah.
But ID verification is absolutely essential in terms of protecting people from identity fraud. We started with the YOTI system, and that still is available, and as far as I can see, works very well indeed. You do need a passport in order for it to work. Over the last 2 years, the government has introduced the Jersey Me system, which does not necessarily depend on a passport. I think it would be fair to say we undertake a number of activities every year through the media, through nudge techniques, to encourage people to file early.
And can I just ask as well, from an administration perspective, since the Treasury Department obviously moved things online, how much have things improved compared to the original manual-based process?
Well, I mean, if we wound back to 2019 and 2018, all returns were paper. It took the larger part of the year to assess them manually. we're now at a position where over 50% of people file online. The significant majority of those are effectively assessed automatically without human intervention.
Okay.
So that has driven significant efficiencies. Our people are largely now being deployed into better quality work. That includes improved customer service. We have been able to manage customer service very well in recent years. And it has improved our ability to actually investigate tax returns and challenge those which are incorrect. Online filing has been a game changer. The sooner we can get from 50-odd% to 90-odd%, the better for the whole tax system.
And I also note that about 88% of the tax returns are assessed within a 30-day period. And I just wanted to know, what is that down to? Is that down to moving online, or is that just down to having, good or sufficient resources within the department?
Well, that is largely down to moving online because, as I say, quite a lot can be assessed without human intervention. Depending on what is put in the return, it might trigger a risk parameter that requires manual intervention.
Okay.
So quite a few are intervened. It's a little technical, but at the moment we don't have self-assessment in Jersey. So strictly speaking, a tax assessment is only final once an officer has taken some action with it. At some point in the future, we would like to move to a system of self-assessment where effectively once somebody has submitted a return and it has been processed through the computer system, it will stand as a legal assessment unless we choose to challenge it within a period of time.
Okay, no, thank you very much. Minister, I just want to also speak about independent taxation. I know there's obviously preparations in the works, and this is also involving a system as well. Hopefully it will be in place for October, and I was just wondering whether you could provide an update on that.
Yeah, well, in terms of, I think the system work, I think is ongoing. The system will be there. We have had the added wrinkle of having to still allow a joint, the wrinkle of still allowing joint filing for couples who elect to have it.
Yep.
Will have added to the complexity and the cost of doing that, but that has all been built in, I believe, I'm told this week. So that I think is working, is coming along on time. We will be doing further public guidance to be issued in October or November for independent taxation, and all married couples will receive a tailored guide in January explaining the mandatory move. Those will be sent to both partners in the couple, so it won't be a case of the previous taxpayer getting it and hoping he or she shares it. So both members of a couple partnership will receive that. We're in ongoing conversations with Frida, who was formerly Women's Refuge, to ensure that they can help support women navigating independent tax. And we're also speaking to them about additional support that might be needed if there are situations of coercive control and financial dependence. We're taking that into account. Autumn guide will be sent to each spouse, and we're also sharing resources and communicating through other networks, community networks and organisations. So the Children's Cluster, Learning Disability, Autism and Disability Cluster, Cancer Support Network, Homelessness, Equality versus Inclusion, to help share to help share information and support clients who need extra support with assisted taxation. So the guides have been worked on. They've been user tested. We've been working those across a 2-year period. They've got checklists, timelines to help people prepare, and the they've been surveyed and we've taken feedback from early soundings into account. We're also planning webinars and in-person sessions in October where people can come in and ask questions. And particular support for seniors, more for older people who are transitioning, although they will still have the option of, they will still have the option if they wish of having joint filing.
Yep.
But we already, in fairness, we do provide, the department will help, as I've probably said during debate, you can't insulate someone from never having to do a tax return, and we regularly deal with elderly widows who are having to navigate the tax system for the first time following the death of their husband or partner. So
Thank you, Minister.
we are well versed in doing that.
Yeah, finally from me at any rate, a couple of questions on the general legislative programme. During the last quarterly public hearing, we revised that the merge of the Financial Stability Board and the Fiscal Policy Panel had been delayed because of other demands on the programme and is likely to be lodged in Q4 2025. Leaving that particular aspect aside for the moment, can you please provide more context about other demands on that programme?
It's not necessarily demands on our programme, it's demands on the legislative programme more widely,
So,
I believe. So it's across government, and it's reflecting, I believe, the demands on law drafting time and the legislative drafting office, and what they and officers can realistically progress. So I think that one, there are other pieces of legislation in the pipeline for government as a whole. I can't give you a list of what is. There is a list, we've talked about it at COM quite recently, so this one has been slightly delayed, but I'm hoping it will be lodged as soon as we can, because I do think it's an important thing to
I'll come back to it.
progress.
But going back to the general delay, I mean, who has overall control then of the demands on the law drafting office? So I ask that in the context that I'm aware from other briefings that you can actually go outside our own law drafting office to instruct law draftsmen. I mean, does that happen often, and or what circumstances would it be if that's the only reason why we're not getting legislation through? Should that not be considered?
My understanding, certainly previous law draftsmen, the principal law draftsman, was we'd absolutely not accept other people drafting laws for them. I think the principal, sorry, she changed her title all the time, the principal law draftsman, or I can't remember her title, Miss Marr-Smith, I believe she will bring legislative drafters in as needed on a sort of contract basis, on short-term contracts to help.
And her supervision, okay.
Where there is need, or where she needs specialism, she will bring people in. I know there has been a lady recently working on all the electoral legislation that's been brought forward by PPC. I believe Cabinet Office, have an overview, or the Chief Executive have an overview of the entire government programme. And we talked about that recently in terms of the progress. And I think the reality is, even though people may have lots of pieces of law they want to bring forward, that there is a kind of natural capacity as to what the Assembly can deal with, or what it has dealt with in the past. So it is that there is an oversight. I think COM make those decisions and ministers make those decisions. We are not.
Okay, but again, go back to the overall view. I mean, are there items of legislation there which or the Cabinet Office are going to be held up in this term simply because of the lack of drafting capacity?
Well, there will always be things that we just don't have capacity to bring forward. I can't remember what is being there has to be which are the pieces of legislation that need to come forward. That it's like everything else. There will be a degree of prioritising about what legislation needs to come through, what is urgent, what is less urgent, and those decisions that comes to come.
Okay, and going back to the merge of the two boards, is that on track for later this year then?
I think later this year. It may slip into next year.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. We have about 5 minutes to go, Minister, and there are a couple of questions that, if you don't mind us returning to a couple of earlier sections. My one is on the budget, and could you tell us the method of how you expect to present the funding for investing in Jersey as a piece of work? How are we expecting that to be presented in the budget?
I believe that will be presented like other capital projects.
So if
Yeah,
they are
thank you.
related to decisions that need to be made in 2026 for funding of projects from 2026, the usual way we do these things would be to make sure that that funding is agreed by the Assembly. If it relates to a longer term initiative, then you would typically expect that to be either, and I don't know which way it will be, that will either be standalone debate or will be in the body of the government plan in terms of the...
Because the new hospital
narrative.
programme, for example, is a separate box within the budget. Is Invest in Jersey envisaged as, because it's a big programme of long-term investment with different work streams and so on, are we going to have to fill it around in the budget to find it, or is it going to be presented as a thing?
I think anything that's coming forward in 26 for funding in 26 will separately come forward. I think I anticipate it being a thing. You're usually better with words than I am, so I'll go with yours.
I don't
It
think
will
it's
be
a hugely
thing that
technical phrase.
You can go to somewhere in the budget and you will see that, rather than coming at it from a numerous different apples.
I would think it would be fairly obvious. I think it will be obvious in the budget. It's not going to be tucked away that you can't find it.
Thank you.
I've got a question about something that's been in the news recently, which is bonuses for arm's length organisation, senior officers. What oversight do you exercise in terms of those bonuses, which can amount to hundreds of thousands of pounds, more than £100,000 per person, 40% of salaries?
Well, the first thing that we have to remember is that bonus schemes are often set out as a matter of contract. When somebody's engaged, they will be engaged on the basis of there is a bonus scheme of some description, whether it's a short-term plan, whether it's a long-term plan. And so that is a matter of contract. Sometimes they're not contractual, but that's just the...
Yeah.
And then we do, as the... we normally do, we see the objectives, they are done against, they're normally... Bonus schemes are normally structured against a number of objectives or key performance indicators, and there will be targets that have to be met, and based on the level of meeting of target or exceeding of target, have you met, have you exceeded, have you super exceeded, for example, that will depend on the weighting of that particular objective. Each objective is weighted. You might have a kind of balanced scorecard type arrangement. So we will be consulted at the start of the process. We will be told what the objectives are. In terms of measuring that, it's a matter for the board. So the boards all have their own remuneration award committees. They go through all those very closely, and they then make the assessments. And we're usually notified. It's not normally something that you can get to... I mean, clearly, if I had a real problem, if they said, we're going to pay this person full bonus, and I'm thinking, well, actually, what about this situation over there? The boards, I do believe, I'm assured by the boards, that they follow a very rigorous and robust process. I know that one of the boards, certainly one of the remuneration boards, cut back the budget, cut back the and there are a very small number of individuals. It's generally the very senior executive team. They said, well, technically the bonus could be this, but actually it's going to be, we're not going to award as much. So the boards, the remuneration committees take a very robust view on that, as they do in all the, I believe, all the other ALOs. I speak to them about executive remuneration. I have challenged them more than once. For example, if they come in and say, I'm not going to name names, but let's say one of them came and said, we are going to put an X% pay rise across the board. because that's matching government. And I've said, well, actually, no, at senior level, government did not get that. They got that. And I don't expect senior executives who are on very high salaries to be getting the same pay rise as the cleaners. You know, so I expect a degree of objectivity and rationality about that. I do challenge them a lot on salaries. I've met them recently, and I have said that I don't want to see a continuing. I don't want to see bonuses spiralling. That they have to be appropriately benchmarked. That against, you know, we cannot compare some of our utilities or our companies with massive listed companies in the UK. And I have also said that for future schemes, I would like them to look at objectives that really are about stakeholder delivery for stakeholders, customer experience, customer service, and that I would like them to be very much more focused on to have categories for those going forward, whether those can come in right away. But I have really challenged the chairs of all the state-owned entities on that.
Could I really quickly ask? You mentioned each bonus scheme will have, in essence, a scorecard of how it's calculated.
Each have slightly different schemes.
Is it readily available to your department, the current scheme that each scheme is on, so that your officers who exercise the stakeholder representative function can pull up to you at any moment for all the schemes in existence? These are the scorecards. These are what performance is measured against.
Yes, I'm sure we could.
And just to
well, we will see them.
And you will hold on record what those.
When you say hold records, it's kind of, we're not holding records and analysing them all the time, but we will have them in a file somewhere. So, but if we couldn't find them, we could go and say, please give us those, and they would give them over. They would provide the information we asked for. There isn't a, no, you can't tell me that. And then would they give us, the remuneration committees gives us their assessments. So we also see their assessments of how those bonuses are calculated. And I do believe they follow a robust process. You know, it is, and I have made it clear that, you know, we've discussed, I think they were quite offended but that I might have thought they weren't following a robust process.
Thank you very much, Minister. We've come to the end of our time.
Thank you.
And thank you to the Assistant Minister as well and your officers for your time today. We appreciate it.